So let me introduce our next plenary speaker, although I'm sure that most of you already know Dr. Diana Walsh Pasulka, who's a professor of religious studies at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. Her research focuses primarily on intersections of religion and technology. She touches a vast gamut of fascinating topics, from concepts of the afterlife to digital media and religion, to artificial intelligence, and of course, as we all know, to cultural significance of unidentified aerial phenomena, as exemplified especially by her 2019 book, American Cosmic: UFOs, Religion and Technology. Well, a conversation about unidentified aerial phenomena is fascinating for us for many reasons, of course. But one of them is that it's an opportunity to discuss how religion and art and science and technology all intersect in contemporary culture. And we are not just talking about some marginal cases, of course, but oftentimes we are talking about people who are working at the frontiers of research in various scientific fields. And Dr. Pasulka focuses precisely on the scientist believers who sometimes openly research unidentified aerial phenomena while continuing their research as scientists and remaining, of course, highly rational people who are trained in their respective scientific fields. In one of her interviews, Dr. Pasulka mentioned that when she started to work on American Cosmic, she started to write it as a skeptic, but as she worked on the book, she became agnostic about the topic of unidentified aerial phenomena, and I like that very much because it feels as though being agnostic is actually a good place to be if you are a scholar, if you are a researcher. Because being agnostic ultimately means to keep your mind open, for different possibilities, to keep your mind open to the weirdness of the universe we inhabit. And to keep our minds open is precisely what this conference is all about. Dr. Pasulka's lecture today is entitled Mathematicians and Artists: The New Sides of UAP Field Research, or Toto, we aren't in New Mexico anymore. I'm sure that it will greatly contribute to our appreciation of how marvelous and how weird the topic and our universe itself are. So please help me welcome Dr. Diana Pasulka.
Once upon a time, a long, long time ago, in 2017 actually, I emailed a book manuscript to my editor, Cynthia, at Oxford University Press. The manuscript was the culmination of what I consider to be the weirdest research I had conducted in my life up to that point. I'm not a stranger to weird research. I'm a scholar of religion, and I have researched the extraordinary states and alleged acts of saints and doctors of the Catholic Church my entire academic life. In truth, even prior to my academic life. I have also examined the history of Marian apparitions. But in 2017, I had written a manuscript that was different from anything I had written before. In this manuscript, I made a significant methodological shift from my previous research. I suggested that there was, or there would soon be, scientific truth claims that supported the extraordinary events and claims that I had documented in the manuscript. And I actually turned out to be correct. Although at the time I was criticized, and this is kind of funny, for being gullible and credulous, and I understand. Some colleagues called my work interesting, which for those of you in academia, you know what that means. It means totally not interesting, and neither is it relevant. To be fair, my story is ludicrous. I mean, I document my travels with scientists who take me to a secret place in the desert in New Mexico, blindfolded to mine for alleged extraterrestrial artifacts. These scientists told me that this was one of several places that had been there since the 1940s and were sites where extraterrestrial crafts had crashed. Admittedly, this is a weird thing. It's especially a weird thing for a mother of young children to do, or anybody for that matter. So I understood the raised eyebrows. At the beginning of my book, I approached my research as a contemporary myth. I was traveling to the epicenter of the UFO mythos, New Mexico, to the place made famous not so much by Roswell itself, but by the X-Files. By the end of the book, my mind had crashed. It rebooted several times, and finally, it upgraded. This is the story of that upgrade, and it is more than a personal story. It is the story of UFO research itself. Between 2017 and 2021, in 4 short years, the landscape of UFO research has completely changed. I think we can all agree that this shift has been paradigmatic. If 2017 was a place, it would be Kansas. Like Dorothy, I look around and I say, we are not in Kansas anymore. I ask, where are we? And what does this shift mean? And most importantly, where should we go from here? Before I suggest some directions, it is worth revisiting the shift years. In my own experience of these years, I can identify several distinct moments. The first is 2017. Is Leslie here? Leslie? Ah, all right, here she is. Just after I turned in my book manuscript, the New York Times published a series of articles documenting the existence of secret government programs of scientists who studied UFOs, just as I had discussed in my book. By the way, I didn't know Leslie at the time. The article's bold declarations were illustrated with seeming video evidence, which included fighter jet pilots cursing and joking about the now famous tic-tac flying machines that were also recorded on radar by naval intelligence officers. My book was in press during these electrifying media disclosures. Just like everyone, I was amazed and shocked. Although I had predicted something like this would happen, I honestly didn't expect it to happen so soon. 1 year after this, other media sources, including The New Yorker, The Washington Post, The Atlantic, and others, began to publish similar stories about UFOs. My book was then published in 2019. These reporters reached out to me. Some of them revealed that they had been given a mandate to write about the topic, and one reporter even stated that he wasn't at all keen to write about UFOs, but would follow the mandate anyway. At the time, I thought that was strange, and I still think it's strange. Between 2019 and 2020, there were rumors that the United States government would do something historic with respect to knowledge of UFOs. Within a short time, the rumors coalesced into a prediction that the government would release a report about the existence of the programs referenced by the New York Times articles. In June 2021, an unclassified version of a report was released. The Pentagon report acknowledged the existence of anomalous aerial objects, and they named them UAP, Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon. And just like that, UFOs were UAPs. Well, they had been UAPs before, but nobody really knows that. Now they're officially UAPs. Significantly, the government's report does not provide an answer to the question of what the aerial phenomena are. Yet, the idea that they are extraterrestrial was bolstered in the public imagination by the media that accompanied the report. The media, including coverage by CNN, Fox News, and pretty much all the mainstream sources, featured experts like NASA's Bill Nelson, who had read the classified version of the report. He was among many public authorities who said that he believed we are not alone in the universe. While the unclassified version of the Pentagon report did not disclose the existence of extraterrestrial events or objects, the experts in their public testimonials certainly did create and bolster this belief. Scholars of religion recognize that the use of testimonial witness from public authorities is often used in the formation of traditional religions and new religious movements. The testimonial evidence of cultural authorities is used to support truth claims that are not actually supported by tangible evidence. So I thought this was an interesting move that was being made, and I wrote about it in Religious Dispatches. These moments revealed a public-facing story that unfolded in a relatively short period of time. The shift from the UFO, once clouded in secrecy and ridicule, to the UAP, now the fodder of mainstream consumer culture. This unfolding narrative certainly helped to bolster the claims I made in my book, and for that I'm grateful. Those academics who had previously called my work interesting were now calling me on the phone and asking for my connections. And that was pretty awesome. Just saying. And I thank you, Leslie, for that. Now, before, during, and after these media disclosures, there were other significant yet less public developments in process. One was the ongoing work of what I would name the Visible College. The Visible College is comprised of academics and researchers without clearances, many of whom are here today. Its members meet at various locations, including Esalen Center for Theory and Research in California, but other places as well, like the virtual spaces of email threads in which members share research, conclusions, and jokes. Members of the Visible College don't work in secret. They work by the code of transparency. Even while being transparent, the work of the Visible College does not receive widespread public recognition. Its members, well, they didn't, they do now. Its members do not write press releases of their findings. Instead, their research is peer-reviewed, which is a slow and often plodding process of knowledge production, not a quick soundbite for the news or for Twitter. I'm going to go through some of the people. If you're not represented here, please don't take it personally. It just means that I did not know you while I was doing this research. Obviously, this is Jeff. What is it about people here who like masks? Enjoy these kinds of masks. Okay, so this is Brenda Densler. Some of her archives are here in the archive here. She actually donated her archive to me, I think it was in 2013, and I actually at this point didn't think I wanted to continue doing this research. I'd done it for about a year, but it was pretty weird, and I actually didn't think that it was a good fit. I thought, you know, I'm not really interested in the dark sides of the UFO community. It happened to be on my birthday, I received an email from the chair of my department. He said, this woman, you don't know her, but she wants to donate her archive to you of UFO research, and she's dying. And I felt, wow, okay, so I'll take the archive. Thankfully, she's alive. And I had the archive for about a year, and I went through it, and it convinced me to continue on with the research. So this is Brenda. One thing that happened, Dr. Nolan, this is Gary Nolan from Stanford. He's James in my book. I had to use pseudonyms for some of the scientists in my book. This is prior to 2021. So it still had to be an invisible process. That's why I'm talking about these years as the shift years, because Gary wouldn't, now he's out. He's saying that he's James in my book, which now I can safely say that he is. So he went with me to New Mexico, and we found the parts, and he's done analysis of them. So these are some of the people whose works I've read during the time. Carla Turner, obviously Jacques. Jacques, by the way, is part visible college and invisible college, and I'll talk about that in a minute. This is a former student of mine, Jose Herrera, and I'm working with him now, and he's helping me with understanding this what I call a post-three-dimensional archive, which is a terrible name for it, but I just don't have a better name for it at this point. So obviously Whitley, David, Greg. All right, the term the visible college, those are folks that are in the visible college. The term the visible college obviously references the invisible college, which is the name of Dr. Jacques Vallée's book of the 1970s and his own reference to the original invisible college of the early modern time period of European history. He used this term, which was actually repurposed by his associate, Alan Hynek, I think I got that history right, to describe the group of scientists with whom he worked on matters of UAP under the cloak of secrecy. The invisible college is an apt description for a group of people who had to work in secret. Yet, there is more to the term than is generally known. It was coined by scientists of the early modern time period like Robert Boyle to describe a cohort of scientists who hammered out, among other things, the protocol of peer review. They worked in secret in order to avoid being accused of heresy. Some of their work was precedent for the Royal Society of London, and yet there is even more that is not generally known about the first invisible college. Members of the 17th century invisible college also dabbled in and were probably initiates of the Order of the Rose Cross, or the Rosy Cross, also known as the esoteric tradition of Rosicrucians. Esotericism refers to I think we all know what it is, but I'm going to say it anyway. It refers to a tradition of knowledge, production, and transmission that is focused on truths that are public. That are not public and that are hidden. So it's a tradition of hidden knowledge. Who are the Rosicrucians? Members of this order attempt to align themselves with what they deem important and perennial truths, and from what I can surmise, they surf while at the same time study a time wave that seems to have a life of its own autonomy, like the Tao. A tenet of this order is that this knowledge is democratically available to all who have the inclination, inspiration, and capacity to study it. It does not discriminate with respect to money, credentials, or insider information. I will return to this idea of a time wave, but first let me clarify a distinction that I've already made, but I want to clarify it. I want to make this distinction between the media events of the shift era, 2017 to 2021, and the work of the visible college. They are parallel yet distinct events and developments. While working independently and without knowledge of the machinations of the media, or even a lot of the secret groups that were happening, members of the visible college produced works that identified secret programs and even found anomalous artifacts. Their members worked alongside the scientists who were members of these secret programs but didn't do it knowingly. Regardless and despite any media spin, the visible college, members of the visible college, produced tangible and accurate knowledge of the state of UAPs. How? By what means did these academics and civilian researchers access information that has been under a paywall of classification and obfuscation for over 70 years? I wasn't given any clearance or key, okay? And Gary Nolan didn't either have any at the time. He may now, but I don't know, probably not. It is here that we butt up against the limits of much of the research into UAPs that relies on what has been deemed purely materialist. Often, the materialism of current UAP discourse discounts the esoteric connections and data of UAP events and objects. This is a mistake. It is the vague data that probably provides an answer to some of our most enduring and perplexing questions regarding UAPs. In my studies, I found that the most successful and innovative researchers of UAPs and science in general were engaging in methods that I would describe as esoteric practice. Here's an example. Through my work, I was gifted with the friendship of the extraordinary scientist and Nobel Prize recipient in chemistry, Dr. Kary Mullis, and his wife, Nancy. He is the person who worked out the now widely utilized polymerase chain reaction. He literally changed our world. He has spoken openly about his UFO encounter, famously dubbed the electric raccoon incident. And if you don't know about it, you have to know about it. It's very fascinating. This is what he says about his experience of science at its most creative and innovative. He says, science is when you are trying to figure something out and something else keeps intruding. You finally give into it, and it turns out to be the answer you were looking for. Perhaps something is lost, and instead of looking for it, you let your hands lead you to it with your eyes closed. You might be looking something up and find the wrong subject, and it turns out not only to be related, but to be exactly what you were after. It's not an accident. It was inevitable, and it all makes sense after the moment, but it's unexpected. That's how this happens. The focus beam of your consciousness is very narrow, but you have a creepy sense of what is right behind you. So that's how he describes his process. Kary's process seems mystical, and many of the scientists and researchers I spoke with have experiences just like this, and they experience their own processes as mystical. The product of their discovery is objective stuff, right? So products like the polymerase chain reaction. But what is most, and this is what most materialist researchers focus on, but the process is data too. Why are so many researchers not just ignoring this process as data, but actively ridiculing it? People don't even want to know about the processes that these scientists engage in. In my research, I identified Tyler, a member of the United States Space Program and now Space Force, who used physical methods, protocols, sleep, body practices, and meditation like yoga and prayer to align, in his words, his body antenna to download information that created space technologies and biotechnologies. He had been a mission controller for almost every space shuttle launch while that program was active. At the publication of my book, he was still doing that work. In my book, I placed him in the tradition of the United States Russian space program and the American space program as their own rocket geniuses, notably Jack Parsons and Konstantin Tchaikovsky, had used similar meditative and ritualistic techniques to download from what they called non-human intelligent beings the calculations for rocket technologies. That's Jack Parsons, founder of our own space program, creator of rocket technologies. As weird as all of this sounds, it's true. And if we are materialist researchers, we wouldn't separate this data from the products that it then produced. To clarify, we should not separate esoteric traditions from the empirical technologies they often create. Or if we do, we lose a whole data set that underpins our most creative, innovative work. Kary used the term creepy, and I must admit that when I found out about the strange rituals in which he actually engaged in, I thought it was pretty creepy too. But they were still, if you look at the patterns, they're still rituals. They're still doing the same kinds of things. They're using rituals. They believe in non-human intelligent entities that they're attempting to communicate with to produce these things, in this case, rocket technologies. It is significant to point out that Tyler was in no way knowledgeable about the tradition in which he contributed. He was completely ignorant about the history and strange roots of the program within which he dedicated his whole life. This man was in the space program since I believe he was 18 years old. When I met him, he was 60. He'd been there his whole life, and he didn't even know who Jack Parsons was. But he used to go to JPL laboratory often, right? Go right under, saw, JPL. So that's unbelievable, but true. What is important to point out is that Tyler found his way into this knowledge using the tools of esotericism and sincerity of intent. Perhaps sincerity is the key ingredient to materialist progress. Why not? How is this not scientific? If this is a pattern, it's data. And my research suggests that this data does repeat. And when I mean sincerity, I'm with Jeff in saying that, I'm not giving it any kind of moral, there's no moral baggage there with this idea of sincerity. What I'm basically saying is somebody has a focus of attention, and that is, they're sincerely going to figure something out, okay? And it could be, it could be rocket technology, but it also could be biomedical information as well. In the early 18th century, Isaac Newton and Gottfried Leibniz, both mathematicians, each thought they had invented calculus. There was a huge controversy about this, as they both came up with the formations at the same time. The situation is that they both arrived at an understanding of calculus independently of one another. You can't create something that is already there. You actually discover it. And that is what we are finding in our way into space. We're discovering the calculations and the technologies. It's like they're waiting for us to find, but we need the right tools. Esotericism seems to point in a direction. I like to quote the scientist experiencers, and I love this quote from Tchaikovsky. So there's Jack Parsons, kind of like the father of our space program, and Tchaikovsky is the father of the Russian space program. And this is what he says, and this is in the early 20th century. We are made as ethereal beings, existing beyond our dimensions of recognized reality. These higher beings are in communion with us, reading our thoughts and sending us messages through celestial symbols, which most of us don't even perceive, much less understand. A genius is one who comprehends and channels these messages from higher beings into technologies, products, and even art. I recall that among those who've spent years studying UAPs, there seems to be a common direction that ends up in a study of consciousness. Former astronaut Dr. Edgar Mitchell had an ecstatic experience while traveling back from the moon while he was in his space capsule. After this experience, he founded IONS, the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and his priority was to study consciousness. Tyler, the mission controller and space shuttle engineer of whom I spoke, sought me out because he had been told by a mentor in the US space program that the next frontier of UAP research would be found in the study of consciousness. The way that Dr. Mitchell and Tyler use the term consciousness is actually not the way that philosophers or cognitive scientists use the term. So they're more, academics are much more technical with respect to that, just like people in my field are technical with respect to religion, the term religion, but people still use it anyway in the ways that they use it. But this is my interpretation of what they're trying to do here. Tyler and Mitchell seem to suggest that consciousness provides a way beyond the nuts and bolts method that dominated UAP research. So they're using the word consciousness rhetorically as a term they think will help them find a way out of an earlier dogmatic materialism. They're attempting to upgrade materialist research to make room for the data set of esotericism, perhaps. I suggest that the new materialism can be found in traditions of esotericism. This is where I discuss the commonalities between artists and mathematicians, which I said I was going to talk about, who are probably surprised to be mentioned in the same sentence. Since the publication of my book, I experienced a lot of things. None is as wonderful as the outpouring of gratitude from two completely different demographics of readers, artists, and mathematicians. From artists, I received pottery, poems, short stories, video tours of installations, invitations to collaborate, all inspired by my book. I was overwhelmed by the generosity and pure kindness from artists of all types. As I wrote my book, I shared each finished chapter with David Metcalf. He and I both agreed that there would probably be 10 readers for my book, but they were wrong. The artists proved them wrong, and so did the mathematicians. Curiously, the book had the same reception from mathematicians. From them, I received recommendations of websites and YouTube channels that describe math concepts like the Platonic solids. They exist in other dimensions, by the way. I did my best to wrap my mind around fourth dimensional concepts. I admit that it was easier for me to admire the pottery on my shelf, gifted by an artist, than it was to grapple with fourth dimensional objects. But I did it anyway, and it was worthwhile for this reason. Because I figured out there was a Venn diagram that exists between, so when you do the Venn diagram, you'll see artists and mathematicians come together, okay? So they share part of the diagram. And so this goes back to the quote by Tchaikovsky and some of the people that I've been mentioning. There are dimensions of information. And I would suggest that these scientists that I've been working with, they're a lot more like artists than we think, okay? They're not so different. Mathematicians reach these dimensions through abstract thought, and artists reach these dimensions through their art. Each utilizes their techne, their craft, to tether into these spaces of knowledge, the dimensions, which are basically archives accessed through one's mind. So back to the Invisible College. When Dr. Villay published The Invisible College, he simultaneously exposed that he was part of an invisible group of scientists while also making himself visible. Thus, with the publication of The Invisible College, ironically, the Visible College was born. The Archives of the Impossible is the Visible College's most tangible and potentially revolutionary product. This product was conceived by Dr. Kreipel, who's obviously part of the Visible College. The inception of this archive happened during the shift years when Dr. Villay wondered aloud to Jeff and a few other academics about what would become of his research. Jacques wasn't the only researcher to wonder about this, as my colleague, Dr. Brenda Denzler, had also her large library, and she wondered. The archive grew and grew as more academics and researchers became aware that this would form an important center for the production of knowledge about UAPs well into the future. I know some, and actually I know a lot of the research that's here in the archive. I owned for a time one of the collections, the Denzler collection, and spent a year living with and going through its contents. I know some of the non-textual anomalous objects that have been donated and their history. Many of the products in this archive are the products derived from research conducted by those engaged in what I'm calling now, and probably I won't keep that name, post-three-dimensional research protocols. That is, they have been produced by people like artists and mathematicians who use protocols, methods, and strategies to tether into dimensions of extraordinary knowledge. These documents and objects are here now in the Archives of the Impossible. One of my favorite interactions with Whitley Strieber that pertains to post-three-dimensional knowledge happened around the topic of one of these objects. Tyler and I were talking about the objects we had taken from the desert in New Mexico, the objects that he believed were from the crashed saucers. We were standing on the cliffs of the Pacific Ocean one evening after a dinner for people who met to discuss this type of research. As we whispered about what might happen to the objects, Whitley appeared out of the darkness amidst a backdrop of shining stars, and he asked us this question. Those parts you have, are you so sure that you are studying them? Or are they perhaps studying you? His question immediately made me think of an essay penned by the controversial philosopher Martin Heidegger called What is an Object? Which also brought to mind Heidegger's other related essay, What is Art? Heidegger didn't know the answers to these questions he posed, and actually we still don't know these answers. I know we won't know these answers, or we don't, because just recently my department was hiring for the position of philosopher of metaphysics. We brought 4 of the brightest scholars in the United States to interview. Each of them proposed their own theory of what is an object. I listened intently to each proposal and, of course, thought of Heidegger also, like, wow, we're still talking about this. You know, I listened intently to each proposal, and after each, I thought, hey, wow, this person has the answer. But the next candidate would come to campus, and their proposal would change my mind. So I can say with certainty that we do not know the answer to the question Heidegger posed so many years ago. But importantly, he pointed us in a direction. This is what Whitley's question did for me. It pointed me to what I believe I am learning from my readers, from the artists, and from the mathematicians. Western esoteric literature is fraught with references to these post-three-dimensional archives, non-physical places of knowledge and information. Within these traditions, these spaces of knowledge include the idea of the Akashic records, which is a non-local space of information mentioned by members of traditions like Theosophy. In today's language, it looks something like the cloud, but with a difference. The cloud you can opt into, but you can't actually easily opt into the Akashic records. But it is one historical precedent for the idea of a storage house of non-local knowledge. Aldous Huxley provides another in his famous or infamous The Doors of Perception. Here you can access information or knowledge by dropping LSD or today taking ayahuasca. I'm not promoting these avenues of access, but merely mention them as precedent for the idea that there are storehouses of knowledge that exist beyond three-dimensional reality and that people have used various means to access this information. The keys are found within esoteric traditions, but also in biochemical or entheogenic means. This is my research now. The research has revealed that there are scientists and technologists whose work reveals another level, a key to access that is to some of these other dimensional, non-local knowledge places. And the key is no longer, biochemical or the protocols. Well, the protocols are still involved, but it's the use of technology. I first became aware of the work of Dr. E.O. Whiteley just after the publication of American Cosmic. She sent me an email from Brazil where she was conducting field research. She is the director of the Space Medicine program at University College London. Her day job as a space psychologist consists of working with astronauts. This is her. Before I go further, let us acknowledge that in the 20th century and early 21st century, we as a species have entered new and extreme environments. We go into space now. We will soon be lost in the metaverse. This conference is hybrid, in person and online. This development is unprecedented and has catapulted us into new forms, just as we're in new forms of anxiety. I mean, that was like a Freudian slip. Just as we're in new spaces, we have new forms of anxiety in these spaces because we haven't developed the tools to deal with these new spaces. So Dr. Whiteley's job is to identify these new states and to help ease our anxiety, if that's even possible. I'm just going to read out from Dr. Whiteley's biography. The curiosity about how we can perform in extreme circumstances and exceed our own expectations led Ia to learn how to fly, skydive, scuba dive, among other hobbies, and study psychology and computer science, the cross-disciplinary discipline now termed human factors and cognitive engineering. She leads projects to develop embedded psychological support for long-duration space missions, and she also helps people with when we do actually send people to alien environments like Mars, she's creating the technology to help them when there is no live communication link with Earth, because this causes a lot of anxiety. Astronauts are at the forefront of existing in the new environment of space. There's even now a syndrome that researchers have identified from which astronauts suffer. The further they get away from Earth, the more likely they are to suffer from this extreme anxiety of being away from their home. Astronauts are trained to be exceptionally controlled, so it's really difficult to determine, even for themselves, if they're losing it, okay? So Dr. Whiteley's job is she created a technology to identify, to do a graphic analysis of their voice to find out if they're losing it. So they can maintain a clear, they sound awesome. They sound great. They're in space, but they're actually having a panic attack. But because they are so trained and well controlled, they're not recognizing this. So her technology recognizes this through graphs. And that's her day job. Her other job, I always find that these scientists have day jobs and then they have their actual job. For our discussion, she's taken this technology, tweaked it, and applied it to learning how to decipher the languages of non-human species. Right now, she's deciphered some languages from insects, an insect species, and some trees. That's what she was in Brazil doing. So she's literally using this technology to figure out what types of languages of non-human species, and she's doing a lot more. She's actually applying this to what's going on in space as well. So nothing is stopping Dr. Whiteley, and her mission is to apply this technology to space and what she finds up there and what the astronauts find up there, her chosen frontier. Okay, so the question is, what does this application look like? So from my discussions with her, the best way I can describe this is with reference to this movie called Avatar, if you remember this movie. It was a movie, the plot was that, I don't know, I think this was a movie of 10 years ago or so, but most of probably you've seen this. But the plot is that there's an imperialist society that looks a lot like ours. And it's basically going to, we have to get a rare metal from them in order to keep our technology going, and that rare metal is called unobtainium. Yeah. So, okay, but what I think is really fascinating, they have to plunder the planet, of course, to get this. But what's really interesting is not necessarily that plot, because that plot we see over and over again. It's the way that James Cameron described tethering into this alien environment. And that is what I'm seeing now with this, with not just Dr. Iya, but also a lot of the other space technologists that I'm in contact with now. They're using technology as a means to, in this movie, the man he's a veteran and he doesn't have the use of his legs, so he can't walk. So they literally put him into this environment so it looks like he's an avatar in social media or something. He's got this really cool avatar where he can walk and run and do all those things. But this is actually another environment. But it's not another environment we could get to in a 3D plane, or a three-dimensional plane, or a three-dimensional craft. We actually have to use technology in order to get into this other dimensional reality. And that's what this stuff looks like. That's what Dr. Whiteley is working on. So technology, I would suggest, Dr. Whiteley also has a protocol, just like the other scientists. So it's not just the technology itself, it's that it's being produced by people who are in they use esoteric practices. Those practices might have different names, but they look exactly the same, okay? And I think this is what we should pay attention to. Just as body protocols and psychedelics were the keys to accessing post-3D archives before, technology appears to be one vehicle to access alien worlds. So Jake the hero is transported into this other place, this other world, an alien world. Perhaps aliens are transported into this world through their own avatar-style technology. I'm in correspondence with NASA historian and astronomer and one of the co-founders of astrobiology, Stephen Dick. And many years ago, he was the person who I think popularized this idea with some of his work. That when we encounter aliens, it'll be through their technology. So Dr. Whiteley is certainly hacking this new terrain. So that's what I'm doing right now. And I want to leave you, I have a son who's taking a class on public speaking. And just before I came here, I asked him, can you give me some tips about public speaking? I'm just about to make a presentation. He said, oh yeah, no problem. He said, just tell them what establish your credibility. Tell them what you're going to talk about, and then talk about it, and then leave them with something profound. And I thought, what? That's a tall order, son. And he said, Mom, you can do it. And so I thought, what? Okay, so I decided maybe this picture from the child from 2001: A Space Odyssey, which I'm keeping in the presentation. I'm not going to leave with this, but I'm keeping in the presentation because Jacques reference to the baby in when he was talking about Brent Landau's Revelation of the Magi. I thought this looks a lot like that. I mean, here you have a baby in an orb. That's very strange. But it's also, we're at the very beginning. So I wanted to say we're at the very beginning of understanding, alien worlds and, these and other dimensions and things like that. And I'm with Whitley's wife, and who says that, we don't need answers. We can't possibly have them, but we need better questions. But I will leave you with this, because I didn't think it was profound, but I did think it was weird. So on my way here, if anybody knows me for more than a year, they know that I'm actually not a good flyer. I don't like to fly. I'm pretty afraid of it, actually. But I fly a lot. So when I fly, I tend to distract myself with lots of things. So on this particular trip, I didn't have any technology that I plugged into anything, so it couldn't read the algorithms of my technology. So I go on, I look for something to watch, and there pops up UFO, right? The Showtime J.J. Abrams UFO. And I thought, oh, wow, that's pretty funny. I'm going to this conference, and here I am. I'm just about to watch this movie about UFOs, which, by the way, I won't watch. Why? Because I'm in that movie. So not only do I see that there's this movie about UFOs, but I'm actually in that movie. And that's what I'm going to leave you with, is that we're in this together, okay? Thanks.